Last week, voting rights activists took to the street to fight against state legislatures who are seeking to push this country back to the Jim Crow era where no one wants to go except the racists and the corporatists. 48 states have introduced 389 bills to suppress the vote, and that is only since January of this year. And far too many of those bills have already become law. The laws do things like banning ballot drop boxes and mail-in voting, reducing early voting days and hours, restricting who can get a mail-in ballot, prohibiting officials from promoting the use of mail-in ballots, even when voters qualify for that, and even criminalizing the distribution of water or food to voters waiting in the long lines that these policies create. Voting, you have to risk your life to vote in these hot climate areas where you have to stand in line for hours. This is just undemocratic. We're going to be talking to investigative journalist Greg Palast on the show tomorrow about exactly what the GOP is up to in Georgia and elsewhere. But today we're going to take a look at the recent March On for Voting Rights, which not only happened in D.C., but there were marches across the country, Miami, Phoenix, Atlanta, your town, probably. And like every organization you've ever heard of was there, Common Cause, Higher Heights, GLAD, SEIU, American Muslim, ADC, the Sierra Club, United Church of Christ. I mean, everybody was involved because any group working for any kind of justice knows that democracy is actually the key to it all. And the activists did it right on the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's historic March on Washington, where in front of the Lincoln Memorial, as you know, King delivered that historic I Have a Dream speech calling on our nation to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. Some of the organizers said, this is a quote from the organizers there, that marching is a form of nonviolent protest, and protest is a form of democratic expression older than America itself. We are marching today to shine the light of truth on what is happening in state legislatures and to ensure that Americans understand what's at stake, and also to give people a mechanism to demand action on the most urgent issue of our generation. It's funny, you look outside and you think, gee, maybe climate change is the most urgent issue of our generation, but without democracy, we will not be addressing climate change. So I agree with these organizers for sure. Act.tv, of course, was live at the march to amplify their light and to spread those truths far and wide. Act.tv's Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats spoke to one marcher about why he is participating today. This is Alex Rios.
We're out here for voting rights because there is an onslaught on our right to vote. Over 400 restrictive voting measures have been introduced in the legislature across 50 states. We can't stand by any longer to allow our voting rights to be infringed upon. We had a historic turnout last year in the 2020 election. That means that expansive measures were introduced and passed and allowed so that people could vote in the most accessible election under the harshest circumstances. And those rights, those access rights, are being rolled back across the country. We can't stand to let that happen. We are still in a pandemic. We are still at risk of losing our rights. We still need more access to the ballot, not just for the able-bodied, but for the sick, for the elderly, for those who work multiple jobs, for those who are people of color who have multiple jobs and are caretakers. We need more access, not less. And so we are here to protect our rights to vote, because what we need are permanent voting rights, not periodic voting rights. We need them to be long-lasting and generational, and that's what we're here for today.
So today's the 58th anniversary of Dr. King's March. What is it like to be marching for the same things that he had to march for almost 60 years ago?
What I'll say is this, is clearly we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Because of Dr. King's march, because of that march 50 years ago, we are able to march today. But for that march, we would not be able to march today. So I am happy and proud to be able to do that today, in that legacy. What is upsetting is that we have to fight for the same fights of the previous generation. That should not be. It's a travesty. It's an American travesty. We cannot let that stand. And I am part of the generation who benefited, a beneficiary of that march, and I don't want to pass on a legacy of inequity to the next generation. So I'm here in the shadows and on the shoulders of those who came before us. I am proud to be here, but I don't want my kids to have to be here 50 years from now.
Well, and so you mentioned the 400 voter suppression bills that are in the state legislatures. I think that, I don't think people really realize how bad it is and how rapidly it happened. I mean, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's clearly overwhelming, and it's a direct retaliation against all of us and all of those who came out in massive numbers to vote. And those who have enjoyed suppressive efforts and enjoyed having the majority of the vote are now retaliating against those who have come out. We brought out our folks in record numbers from all persuasions, from all backgrounds, and we brought out our folks to change the fabric of this country. And they're trying to rip those threads away, and we're here to bring those back.
That was Alex Rios talking to Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats of ACT.tv, who was on the scene there. Did you notice a lot of other media networks on the scene there? Did not. There were a number of marchers we got to talk to, and then a number of folks who spoke from the podium. People that, as I was putting this piece together, I was just blown away. So let's listen in on some of the other marchers and what they had to say.
This is personal for me. I attended the 40th anniversary. I attended the one 2 years ago, and I plan to be here now because the big lie has to die. And I feel like if we don't change this, our country is gone. We're not going to survive. And I just think it's important for us to be here.
I'm out here supporting the Voting Act.
Good. Thank you, by the way.
Sure.
It is a beautiful crowd out here. Is it just me, or is the energy very good right now?
It's a combination. It's the energy of the people. You know what I mean? If everybody here for the same cause.
If you're 16 in Maryland or DC and Virginia now, you can pre-register to vote.
I did not know that.
Yep.
Okay.
With Virginia, it just passed with the recent law, but Virginia, DC, and Maryland have been doing it for a while.
Okay, awesome. How else can people get involved?
They're here, so that's great. I'm volunteering with Headcount, and we're registering people to vote here. We're sending everything off for people to get registered. You can also use the other side of this, where we're letting people send messages directly to their senators and representatives, right here. So you can send them something right now at the march, and also you can just make your voice heard however you know how.
Fighting for justice! Fighting for justice! Protecting our voting rights! Protecting our voting rights!
So what brings you out here?
Voting rights, protecting voting rights of people.
As you should.
As we should. We don't have that much of a problem in Illinois, but we're here supporting everybody else. Georgia, Texas, other places. Yeah, it's getting really bad. And if we don't stand up and continue to fight, no one will stand up and fight. 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and here in 2021, we're still fighting the same fight. It's amazing that we'll be having this conversation right now, and it's kind of frustrating.
Well, I'm 63, and I was a kid when all that voting rights and civil rights was going on, and I didn't understand, being so young, and I can't even believe that it's been this long. We still have to do this fight.
We cannot be silent. We cannot stand and wait and hope somebody's going to do what we need to do. We need to come together and put an action behind your words.
So you've been organizing with Action Network. Are you frustrated that you still have to talk about this?
Yeah, I'm very frustrated because I'm 58 years old. 58 years ago, I'm sure my people, my parents, my uncle, whoever, my family was involved, right? And I'm meeting people here, and we're still standing up for the same thing. When will the people who run this country decide to do what they said, which is be a voice for the people? So yeah, it is very frustrating.
So
and here we are fighting. That's what I even posted today.
You're
fighting for the same thing 58 years later.
Members of the King family were in attendance. The audio feed to the covering media outlets hit some technical snags there, but the family did make a video statement, and their speeches that they gave at the DC event reflected the themes that are included in this video. Here it is.
America was built on the power of protest, on moments when our voices launched movements, but none more pivotal than this.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
On this day, 58 years ago, my father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., challenged America to live up to its promise for all of us, to recognize that every voice deserves to be heard.
But now, some are trying to silence us.
So it's time to get louder.
Without voting rights for all, there is democracy for none.
That's why today we have to march.
Raise our voices.
Pick up the phone.
To cause a little good trouble.
And make this country live up to its promise for all Americans.
So rise up, America.
Rise up.
Your voice is your power.
The time to use it is now.
There were so many notable activists who spoke powerfully at the march. Here is Domingo Garcia, the national president of LULAC.
I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was 10 years old, my father and mother, who didn't speak English, were illiterate, were going through a small town in Texas. And they stopped at a gas station to get burgers. And when we got there, the man, a white man, told my father this and put it at a sign. My father couldn't read. He asked me to read it for him. That sign said, no Mexicans, no Negroes, no dogs allowed. Okay? I tell you that because that struggle continues today. I am from Dallas, Texas. And in Texas yesterday, the Republican court approved and the legislature passed a voter suppression bill. Now, let me ask you a question. Should it be illegal to give people who have waited 6 or 7 hours to vote water? Should it be illegal? Should it be illegal to give an absentee ballot to a senior citizen so they can vote by home by mail? Should that be illegal? Should it be illegal to take souls to the polls or Latinos to the polls? Then we need to stand back and fight back. Su voto es su voz. Your vote is your voice. And there are people who are trying to stifle our voice. But we won't let them. And let me just tell the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, as soon as you sign that voter suppression bill, LULAC will file the lawsuit the very next day to stop you from taking our right to vote. Sometimes good trouble, you got to start it. Sometimes you got to break the law to change the law. I don't have a problem giving water to a senior citizen who's waiting to vote. And if they arrest me for it, I'm willing to go to jail. So is Rosa Parks. So is Cesar Chavez. We got to be able to stand up and defend everybody's right to vote, no matter who, where they may be. And finally, for every Jose and Maria who's toiling out in the fields today to put crops and vegetables on our tables, every Jose and Maria who is washing the bathrooms at a hotel or a restaurant today, to the people who are working in meatpacking plants to put pork chops and chicken and steaks on our tables, they need a voice that can stand up and say, we need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We need to have OSHA enforce the worker protections of COVID for all workers that are essential. And that's the way we're going to do it. So I look forward to working with Martin Luther King III, who came and marched with us for immigrant rights down on the border so that children wouldn't be put in cages. I want to thank Al Sharpton for inviting me here today and for everybody who's working to make sure that when we say with liberty and justice for all, we mean all. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
Garcia he's the national president of LULAC. Ben Jealous was there. He's the current president of People for the American Way and former president of the NAACP. Here's what he had to say.
My name is Ben Jealous, the former national president of the NAACP, president of People for the American Way. I'm here with my chairman, Reverend Tim McDonald of Atlanta. Earlier this week, we in the League of Women Voters led civil disobedience outside the White House because it's time for Joe Biden to stand up and say, filibuster be damned, we must pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We must pass the For the People Act. If Donald Trump could tell his Senate to get the filibuster out of the way to pack the Supreme Court with 4 right-wing justices who do not represent the mores of the American people, then I think Joe Biden can say, get the filibuster out of the way so we can save our democracy. What prompted our civil disobedience in the campaign that we're building at the White House, quite frankly, were Joe Biden's comments at his CNN town hall meeting, where he suggested that these laws can't diminish people from voting. They can't suppress people's votes. He said, people are just going to vote. It is ahistorical. It is deeply disturbing the fact that the president of these United States might believe that voter suppression laws cannot impact the vote should worry all of us. My grandma turns 105 this November. I'm a Kappa, so my Delta sister's back there. She's the oldest member of Delta Sigma Theta in the country. She's the granddaughter of slaves. Her grandfather was born a slave. He died a state legislator. She knew him like I know her. And she carries with her his pain. See, my grandma trained a young woman who would become a senator named Barbara Mikulski when she was a social worker. My grandma has been in this fight for a long time, and she carries her grandfather's pain because her grandfather served towards the end of Reconstruction. And he lived with the pain of having watched many of his colleagues vote to suppress the votes of his constituents, specifically so that men like him could never serve again. And that's why my grandmother was in the streets for the Voting Rights Act. President Biden, please understand history. You are called on to be like President Johnson. Yes, to lead on the economy, to struggle with terrible wars, but also to lead on civil rights, to lead on voting rights, to push the Senate to get the job done. Honestly speaking, as a descendant of slaves, we never signed up for jobs but no rights. Whether you are a white working class woman who's going to have your ability to vote made more difficult, or a black working class man who will have his ability to vote made more difficult by these laws, or you're a citizen of Georgia where the state legislature is fixing to make it possible to just overturn the election if they don't like the results. This is a crisis. President Biden went to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia last month. He said, this is one of the biggest crises ever facing our democracy. Well, Joe, if that's what you believe, then all I have to say is this, and say it with me, please. Hey, Joe, the filibuster has got to go. Hey, Joe. The filibuster has got to go. Let's pass these laws and save our democracy. God bless.
That was Ben Jealous. How fabulous. I love that chant. Democratic representative from Texas is 18. Sheila Jackson Lee was also in attendance, and she spoke as well.
I am tired of being tired. Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being tired. I don't want the clock to stop me from finding my justice. I don't want the clock to tell me, just wait a little bit longer. I don't want it to be said, just be patient just a little bit longer. And so I'm here today to reflect upon our ancestors, those who were enslaved for 246 years. Most people don't want to be reminded of that time in our history. And in that time of slavery, we suffered the brutality of the whip, separated from our families, longing for freedom. And in that Emancipation Proclamation and in that Juneteenth, now a federal holiday, somebody said that you were free. With freedom comes privilege and rights. It comes the honest ability to own property. I saw a brother out there and he said, can you just tell them that homeless people need rights? And I told him I would say it gives us a privilege of not being homeless, not being hungry, not being thirsty, not being without a job. That's what freedom is all about. And yet we come to this time in this moment when people are telling us to wait, continue to be homeless, be evicted, don't have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, don't worry about voting. You can't have the 51st state in Washington, D.C. They don't need to vote. And I'm telling you that I am ready now, as I have been ready before. I don't know if you are ready, but I am. You see, I've got these shoes on, and I'm not going to stop anymore. I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm going to be able to say all things through Christ. But as well, I'm going to say we are blessed with inalienable rights. And those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For that reason, we are gathered here today. I thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton. I thank you, Martin Luther King III, and your family. I thank you all for laying the groundwork. Now it's time for us to run without ceasing. We cannot have poll taxes again. We cannot have brutality again. We cannot be counting the jelly beans in the jar again. But right now, we have the most suppressive voting laws in the entire history of America. We cannot be worse than 1965. Maybe you didn't walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but you got to take these shoes and you got to begin to walk. In a couple of weeks, the United States Senate will return. It is my mission and commitment to show them the respect of their position, but I will not rest. I will not wait. My conscience, my courage, I will not. The question is your conscience and your courage. As I said on the floor of the House, is there courage in this place? Is there courage in the United States Senate? Is there courage in America? Is there now a time when we cannot rest, but we must go forward and determine that it is time now for the Voting Rights Act to be passed? It is time now for H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations. It is time. It is time for George Floyd. It is time for all that brings dignity to human beings. And so, my brothers and sisters, I am a student of the movement. I'm a card-carrying member. But you know what? The question is, are you just a member of the movement? Or are you prepared to drive that movement? Are you a card-carrying member of so many different groups? Are you proud to stand up and say, I'm a member of this, I'm a member of this, I'm a member of the First Baptist Church in America? But are you prepared to be a soul-driving fighter for justice? Are you prepared to engage in nonviolence, civil disobedience? Are you prepared to get arrested? Are you prepared to stand up for justice? I got arrested because I believe that voting rights is determining what we are all about. Yes, I'm a legislator. But the question is, do I legislate with courage or do I step backwards? I believe that if you are out here, 2 or 3 are gathered, remember what I said, we can do all things through Christ who empowers us. And no weapons formed against you shall prosper. So what I'm saying to you now is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas that has the worst voting rights, voting laws that deprives those Texans of voting in the nation. Texas is the worst state to vote in the entire nation. And so I'm empowered in the spirit of Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland, who held this seat before me. I'm empowered by their spirit. And I hope that I am driving forward all of you to be able to say that In this book that John Lewis provided in his last days, he offered messages of conscience. Do you do something because it is consciously right? He offered messages of justice. Do you not step back when justice is being trampled on? He offered messages of dealing with courage. Is there courage here? Is there courage out there? Something is happening in America, something that we are got to overcome, something in healthcare, something in COVID-19, something in Delta, something in justice. We must take our shoes and carry on.
That was Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. I didn't realize Texas was the worst state for voting. I for sure thought it was Georgia. Al Green is also speaking on the obligations of our current Democratic leadership. Here he is.
We cannot, as Democrats, control the House, the Senate, and the presidency and not deliver on the things that the people who set us there to do. When you control the House and the presidency, or the Senate and the presidency, there's an expectation. But when you control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there's an obligation. We have an obligation to pass the George R. Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We have an obligation to do it because there should be no-knock laws. They should be eliminated. No no-knock laws. Breonna Taylor would still be with us. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to pass legislation that will give the District of Columbia statehood. Here's some facts that you need to know. There's some inconvenient truths that we have to deal with. Here's one. D.C. has a higher per capita tax rate than most states in the country. D.C. has been trying and has been denied statehood for centuries. Friends, it is about more than taxation without representation. It's about overtaxation because of underrepresentation in the Senate of the United States of America. That's what it's about. And we have got to pass it. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And here's why. We have a right and an obligation to do it because Dr. King marched so that we might have these voting rights. Schroeder, Goodman, and Cheney gave their lives so that we could have these voting rights. Medgar Evers was murdered on his front porch so that we could have these voting rights. We have a duty to those who have shed blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The truth of the matter is this. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 may have been signed in ink by President Johnson, but it was written in the blood of those on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, on the blood of John Lewis, on the blood of Medgar Evers, on the blood of Schroeder, Goodman, and Cheney. We must pass it, and you have to help us get it done. If you're going to help us pass it and you know it, stand up and show it. Let's stand up and give the Voting Rights Act the motion, the energy it deserves. Are you with me? Are we going to move? Can we do it? Let's do it together. Remember, I'm Al Green. I love you. Let's have some love and happiness for the good times. Let's stay together.
That was Al Green. We are watching the March On for Voting Rights from D.C. happen. It happened last week on the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. Very poignant event, very powerful event. You can follow what the folks are doing at marchonforvotingrights.org. I'm Julianna Forlano. This is ACT.tv. Please subscribe to us, share us, etc., etc. You don't see other people doing this, really just straight up covering what the progressive activist movement is doing. And I think it's important. I think you should take a moment to click.